I didn't realize that you actually play a role in the book itself in a number of these interviews, working as a paralegal. Tell us a little bit about that as your specific role in uncovering this information.
Sure. Well, I got in onto the case 10 years after the Oklahoma City bombing, though, like millions of Americans, I had witnessed the atrocity and the devastation of that day. But it wasn't until 10 years later, as I was prowling around for my old friends at America's Most Wanted, where I had been the news director, um, thinking about an anniversary piece on the mystery man of the Oklahoma City bombing, known only as John Doe 2, one of the great mysteries of American crime. He rode next to Timothy McVeigh in the bomb truck. He was seen by 24 witnesses, and yet he vanished into thin air. So I was looking into that, Jack, and I got a phone call from a victim in Oklahoma City, a survivor, a grandmother who lost two babies in that daycare center, slaughtered there that day. And 10 years after the bombing, having attended two trials, she was convinced that the government was not telling the truth about what really happened.
And this idea then that the victims, and this is something because for a lot of people saying, "Oh, how can you reopen this?" And that I think it's so important for people to understand that there are victim families that have reached out, and they appear, by the way, every step of the way because of the access that they have to information that they've discovered, they've gotten through discovery, or that they've gotten in through various cases, or just information they have because, of course, the victims' families are directly related to many of the eyewitnesses in this case, that they are the ones who have been demanding answers for 30 years. And this year, of course, is the 30-year anniversary.
That's absolutely right. There were Kathy Sanders and her husband, Glenn Wilburn, in right after the bombing and for the next 2 years, were pivotal in unearthing hard evidence about the bombing that no one, including the FBI, was turning up. And they did so because they just had a burning desire to know the truth about what happened to their two grandchildren, also slaughtered in that daycare center.
And it's impossible to say no when someone asks you a question like that. When someone comes to you and says, "I need to know the truth about what happened." I'm a dad. I've got two little boys, and so reading through this, it's something you think about. In this day and age, ever since then, that whenever you drop them off at school or at daycare, you never really know.
It is. It is impossible to say no, Jack. And I was sitting in my writer's studio in Los Angeles when the phone rang, and Janie Coverdale, the grandmother, barely introduced herself and just said, "We need your help out here." Before I knew it, I was on a plane to Oklahoma City, as if I was still the news director of America's Most Wanted, but I wasn't. It was just me on that plane.
Like, so we know the official story. The official story, it's Timothy McVeigh. Terry Nichols kind of gets involved, but then pulls out. He gets picked up later in Kansas. Where was it for you that official story, and of course, you're hearing this from all the victim families. Where was it for you that some cracks started to appear in that official narrative?
Well, at the very beginning, it was the first year of the investigation. Again, long before I became actively involved in the case, I was a news junkie and a witness, a citizen witness, like millions of Americans, so shocked about what I saw that day, the agony, the devastation, the injury on April 19, 1995. But I had this other perspective, which was that I had been the news director of America's Most Wanted. And I had worked hand in glove with the FBI. I got as close to the high profile manhunt stories as any journalist could. So I looked at the scene and the early coverage of the bombing, and almost immediately red flags went up. On the one hand, I was wishing for a minute that I was back at America's Most Wanted and I could push the story. But on the other hand, I was seeing cracks in this narrative almost immediately. The 24 eyewitnesses to the bombing in Oklahoma City that day on the bombing run, as Timothy McVeigh delivered and detonated that bomb, are absolutely critical because they saw not just Timothy McVeigh, but they saw the man never identified who rode next to him in the bomb truck. So that was a big red flag for a story that was heading for this was lone wolf terror by Timothy McVeigh. He built the bomb and he delivered it by himself. That's what prosecutors would tell the jury, and that's what would bury Timothy McVeigh. Meanwhile, top journalists were reporting that the FBI had collected surveillance videotape of that moment, the delivery of the bomb truck. They had McVeigh and his never identified accomplice on videotape, which the American public has never been allowed to see. And thirdly, in that first sequence of the investigation, a grand juror on the McVeigh grand jury was so distressed by what he saw inside that jury that he went rogue. He started leaking to the Daily Oklahoman and eventually wrote a letter to the judge accusing federal prosecutors of rigging that grand jury, and specifically because they were hiding the identity of John Doe 2. So those were enormous cracks in the case. And if I could add one more, which is just kind of an incredible X-Files moment, recovery workers brought a severed human leg out of the rubble of the Mura building that was never connected to any of the bombing victims. So there was someone else out there, and experts would later tell Timothy McVeigh's defense team that in all likelihood, or very possibly, this leg belonged to one of the bombers, again, completely defying the idea of lone wolf terror.
So this and this really becomes, I think, the backbone of all of this, where and it blows up the official narrative right on its head to say, wait a minute, someone else was in the truck, a John Doe 2, who, by the way, and for folks who don't know, this was not Terry Nichols. Terry Nichols was not even in Oklahoma City. So I know in the public mind, people think, oh, we know who his co-conspirator was. It was Terry Nichols. This is not him. So this is someone who was in the truck with him that day, who was originally reported by eyewitnesses. There was a sketch. There was a manhunt, which, by the way, in your original capacity at America's Most Wanted, that's exactly what America's Most Wanted did, is you ran manhunts.
Absolutely.